is a public entity at either the state or local level. And here we're dealing with the local level, so the city council, city service or civil service commission. Now there are some exceptions to a private entity that both receive direct or indirect public funding and is intertwined with government functions. So the key there is that and, you have to have both. You could have an instance where a private entity receives state or federal funding, but they're not intertwined with government functions. And there's a case from the Supreme Court, Arkansas Supreme Court, that dealt with a county organization that provided ballet performances. They received state and federal funding, so they meet that first portion. They receive direct or indirect public funding, but the court found that ballet is not really something that's a government function. So they didn't meet that second element, and that seems pretty obvious in that situation, but you got to have both. So again, you have to receive direct or indirect public funding, and then it has to be intertwined with government functions. So essentially, stepping into the shoes, if you have like an accounting firm that is a step in the shoes of the city accountant, that would be something that's intertwined with government functions. So you got to have both of those there, and that's only for a private entity to be covered by the FOIA. But most of the situations here, like the city council and the very like zoning board of adjustment, sign board of appeals, those are going to be public entities under the FOIA. So that's the first step, is who is actually covered by the FOIA for purposes of meetings. And then we move on to whether or not it is a meeting that is covered. So an event or gathering is a public meeting if two or more members of the governing body meet, and then we'll get to constructively if the governing body effectively communicated even though no two members gathered or directly spoke. Sure, so first I'll start with the definition of meeting is circular. So in the statute, a public meeting is a meeting of governing bodies. So I guess the next question is, well, what is a governing body? So the city council, that's a governing body. And you don't have to have a quorum to have a meeting. So if you're, let's say, I like to use the Waffle House example. Let's say you have city council members, let's say 3 that are meeting at the Waffle House. It's not in this very formal setting. And you're talking about, let's say, how you're going to vote on an upcoming action that's going to go before the board. That could be a public meeting even though you're not in an official setting and you're at a Waffle House. Now, if you're just talking about sports, the Razorbacks, and barbecue, and that's it, then that's generally not going to be a meeting. But if you start talking about how you're going to vote, what things that are going to come before the council at a later meeting, then that can be a meeting, even though it's informal. It doesn't have to be a formal setting or makeup. And that kind of gets to a little bit too, is this idea of polling can count as a meeting. So an informal meeting by way of one-on-one meetings. So say one council member meets with someone else to see how they're going to vote. That can still be a meeting even though you don't have, it's just a one-on-one interaction. That's polling. How are you going to test the temperature in terms of how you're going to vote? It doesn't matter if it's email, by telephone, or in person. If the mayor meets with each city council member for the purpose of making decisions, that has been held to violate the FOIA as a meeting. Now, if you have intermittent and incidental, again, you brought up Councilwoman Williams, just kind of informal, having coffee with each other, just discussing things that are, and even if official business comes up intermittently or incidental, then that generally is not going to be a meeting. It kind of comes down to, again, what's being talked about, chance meetings is generally not going to get you there. Any other questions on? Yeah, so that would not be, a violation. And not talking about how things are gonna be voted, yeah, just telling, right. And also, something else that would be okay would be saying what's gonna be on the agenda, generally, just kind of, hey, heads up, this is what we're gonna, but, again, where it would cross the line is if you start talking about, yes, exactly.
What did you say? If I was polling, where are you gonna vote on it?
But if you're calling each individual and you're talking about something that could come before the body for a vote, even though you're talking each individual at a different time, is that a violation?
It could be. I mean, again, it all depends on kind of facts. If it's just notifying of kind of what's going to be on the agenda or what's going to happen, generally speaking, that's going to be okay. Again, it just depends on how far it goes in terms of the discussion. It's better to limit the discussion. Here's what we're going to be generally talking about on the agenda, and then not go into details about, how, again, you don't want to be making decisions or decision-making before, unless it's in public.
Just strictly informational, not a violation. I'm just giving you information.
Generally speaking, no. But again,
Okay.
it could always cross that line depending on the facts. But again, if, let's say there is a meeting, okay, so then what next? There are steps you'd have to take if there's a meeting, even if it's informal, if you're at the Waffle House. And that gets us to the notice requirements. So, okay, what happens if you have a meeting? If you got 3 or 4 council members, you're, at a, I don't know, a gym class or just getting coffee, and you have a meeting. Well, then you have to have, there's notice, attendance, and recording. Let me go back. The notice must be given to anyone who requests. This is for regular meetings. They're only entitled if someone requests. So, but if someone requests, you've got to give them notice. It could be done orally or in writing. The posting of the notice or purchasing newspaper ads, that's not required by the FOIA. There could be other statutes at play, but generally speaking, that's not required. Let's say the meeting location changes. You would need to do a second notice with the update. That would be required. If proper notice is not given, then that's an issue. That would be invalid. So you need to give, if there's a meeting, you need to give notice. Keeping minutes is not required by the FOIA. And again, it may be required by their statutes or law, but keeping minutes is not required by the FOIA. But notice is required for special emergency meetings. Again, you also have to notify the time, place, and date 2 hours in advance to news media in the county where the meeting's held, and then located elsewhere that cover the regular meetings, and then those that have been asked to be notified. So that's for special emergency meetings, but regular meetings, you just have to give notice to those that ask for it. But notice would be required for all meetings. Any questions on that specifically? If not, in terms of attendance, anyone has a right to attend a meeting but not participate. So there's a difference there. They have a right to attend the meetings, the open meetings, but they don't have a right to participate. Again, outside the FOIA, there could be other statutes that may require or guarantee a right to participation, but the FOIA itself does not create a right to someone to participate in an open meeting. A person attending, so this sometimes comes up, a meeting does not need to be required to sign in for purposes of the FOIA. And then reasonable restrictions. So like if there's limited seating or procedural rules to ensure that city business is conducted in an orderly manner, that's okay. To ensure that you don't have disruptions, you can do that. Yes?
Okay. With respect to signing in, we have a sheet, and we ask individuals that wish to speak.
I know, I'm bad. We have individuals who wish to speak at the meeting, either on an agenda topic or just a general comments. And our purpose is not to tell them that they can't speak if they don't sign that, but it's so that my clerk has their name and can put in the minutes who spoke. Would that be permissible?
Yes, it's not mandated or required, but that would be permissible. But again, that's, in terms of FOIA speaking, that would be, I don't see that being prohibited.
Okay, thank you.
What I heard him say is he didn't have to sign in just to come and sit down.
Right, but when I heard sign in, that's when
Yeah.
that thing popped in my head, so.
Yeah, and same thing. I mean, it's not, for purpose of FOIA, it's not required or mandated, but the fact that you do that is also not gonna be prohibited. And again, remember the main goals of the FOIA, that's to maintain openness and, again, to be public. And so, in terms of any kind of restrictions, they just need to be reasonable, and again, managing disruptions, that's okay. So that gets us to the attendance recording. Public and news media, there's a bunch of Attorney General opinions on this. Public and news media may make audio and video recordings of any meeting required to be open to the public under the FOIA. And then media may also broadcast live. That is okay under the FOIA. But the recordings, as mentioned earlier, in terms of disruptions, the recordings and broadcasts cannot disrupt the meetings. So there is a line there. Recordings are subject to reasonable restrictions to avoid disruption and maintain orderly meetings. And you can have rules, the city can have rules to make sure that things are quiet, so you don't have some kind of machine making loud noises and disrupting the meetings. Also, you can also have some reasonable restrictions to ensure that folks don't have recording equipment that block the view of the public or the members of the council. And disruptive individuals can be removed from meetings. The FOIA doesn't restrict that, so if someone's being disruptive, they can be removed. And the fact that a member of a governing body is uncomfortable with being filmed or recorded is insufficient to restrict or prohibit all recording devices. So you can't do that just because someone may feel uncomfortable with that. That's part of being in the open and public with meetings. Any questions on the notice, attendance, or recording portion?
Well, on the recording, we have had an individual before kind of been disruptive on the recording as far as just getting in people's face, not in their faces, but being on the front row, kind of just being disruptive, but not really disruptive, if you know what I mean.
Well, and that's the thing, if it's not really disruptive, then it's not disruptive. Again, if they're being disruptive, that can be something that you can handle, and that's just a matter of kind of, at the time, I guess where they're sitting in the front row here. Okay, during the meeting, during the actual meeting. Okay, and does the council have any kind of, right now, rules on that, on recording equipment, anything like that?
No, sir.
Okay. I mean, generally, if it's not making noise and it's not actually blocking a view, you can, have someone move, to the side. You can't prohibit them from recording at all. So again, I don't see an issue with location as long as you don't move them to a corner and they can't film at all. But again, the question is it really a disruption?
Well, it could be if they're blocking other audience members from seeing the city council proceedings.
Sure, and if that's happening, then I think you can relocate, again, as long as they can still record. But you can relocate so that way it doesn't block or prohibit someone else from viewing or seeing the city council. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Oh, and one thing here, it's not listed, but voting, access to voting, the public must be able to see how each member of the governing body voted. So generally, the council will do that orally on the record. You cannot use a method of balloting to conceal how members voted. So like unsigned written ballots, can't do that under the FOIA. You can vote by show of hands, and again, most cities will do like a written vote or an oral vote on the record. If an initial vote is later expunged and another one's taken, ballots from the first vote must also be available to the public. So again, it's all about access to the voting, and then getting to exceptions. So we've got a meeting, so we have a covered entity, the city council is a covered entity under FOIA. We've got a meeting, more than 2 people, the city council, meet the definition of meeting. Now, do we have any exemptions? And there's only 4 licensing exams, and there's very specific requirements set out in the statute for that. Water security also includes utilities, certain utilities that are run by the city, child maltreatment oversight committee, and personnel matters. And what we're mostly going to talk about tonight is the personnel matters. That's the by far the most critical exception that most cities, most entities, government entities are going to have to face and deal with. So in terms of personnel matters, FOIA contains exemptions allowing a government body to meet in private. It's a permissive exemption, it's not mandatory. And a government body may choose to meet in public on a personnel matter. So just because you have a personnel matter doesn't mean you have to meet in private. You can, but it's not mandatory. This exemption is limited to employment, appointment, promotion, demotions, discipline, or resignation of any public officer or an employee. So it's very specific. It has to meet one of those items to fit that personnel matter exemption. The justification for that is that public employees have a legitimate interest in his or her personnel privacy and personnel records and reputation. The government arguably functions more efficiently if internal staffing and management decisions are reached in a private, so it's not put into kind of a aquarium for everyone to see. There are some things that are best to be done not out in the open. But again, there's very limited areas that you can do that in. Again, appointment, promotion, demotion, discipline, or resignation of any public officer or employee. And applies only to matters involving individual officers or employees.
What advice can you give us about when a meeting ends and there's still conversation in the meeting room among folks? Does that go back kind of to what the subject is what is being discussed? I mean, if the meeting is adjourned, I'm assuming that there shouldn't be any more discussion about city business at that juncture. Would that be correct?
Yes, because the official meeting's over, unless you have some folks, on the side of the room talking about city business, that can be a meeting. And so you've got to be, and then because it's a meeting, you have to go through the notice and all those requirements.
Okay.
So yes.
Thank you.
Anything else on that? Any questions specifically with personnel matters or any of these other exemptions?
I have a question. So for an exemption, if I were to send a personal email on my city email account and send it to my husband, let's meet at Senior Tequila tonight at 6, it doesn't follow, there's not a specific exemption in the law, so it could be sent. Is that correct?
So that's going to be, and Ryan's going to talk about that here in a little bit.
Okay.
That sounds more like a record. So there's different exemptions and different analysis, very similar to public meetings. But Ryan will get into a little bit more
Okay.
detail on that. So, yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name at the beginning. Will?
Will, yes.
Okay, Will. I'm sorry. Going back just one step, you was talking about the meeting after the council meeting.
Yes.
What, as a member of the council, obviously, we have constituents asking us questions and comments, and you know how that goes after a meeting, and you're responding to them, and it's not a one-on-one between council members. Other council members may overhear because we're all in the same room.
So if you have let's say the mayor or one individual council member talking to someone who's not a part of the governing body, so the city council, then that would not be a meeting. But again, if you start getting to the area that I talked about earlier about polling, or you kind of look like you're trying to work around, then that can be an issue. But if it's one person of the governing body talking to someone who's not a part of that governing body, or even a different agency, then you don't have a meeting there. So it's if you have members of a governing body, so the city council, talking to each other, and especially when you get into business that would be before the council, that's when you're going to get into issues. But if you're talking to a citizen who's not a part of the governing body, at least based on those facts, don't see a meeting there.
That's a really good point, because, I mean, I've had people after the meeting come stand up here and ask me questions about how these two guys are still here. So they're gonna hear this dialogue that has to be done with something that was tabled or whatever else. So, they may have ears to it, but the conversation was initiated this way.
Yeah, and that, again, you have to be careful with that, and that sounds like that get in the area where it's incidental. So again, if there's something that's incidental, it's probably not. But if it's where, if you know that you got council members, behind you and purposely are saying things that, again, that's gonna be where you cross the line. But if it's an incidental thing and you're talking to someone who's not a part of the governing body, then it doesn't sound like you have a meeting there. And again, just because you have a meeting is not end-all be-all. You just have to go through those requirements of notice, announcement, et cetera. You have to go through all that process.
Even if they're just sitting there, like they're talking to her, these two are sitting there and they're not interjecting, they're just sitting there and they hear this. They're not engaging, they're just hearing that information inadvertently or whatever.
Yeah, if it's inadvertently or even like incidental, again, probably not an issue. But again, it could be just depending on circumstances. But if you're just sitting there and you happen to hear a little bit of the conversation, and again they're talking to someone who's not a part of the governing body, probably not gonna be a meeting.
Does it depend upon what the topic is? Like if it's about business or future business versus, hey, I've got a drainage problem on my street, because they'll do that after, at council meeting, they'll run up and be like,
Yeah, that's certainly part of it. And now again, if the drainage issue is going to be something that comes up before the board at the next meeting, and that could be an issue. But if it's just general, again, you're going to have constituents coming up to you, all different type of issues, potholes, et cetera. Again, they're not a part of the governing body. You may be, but again, that's not going to be a meeting. And then if you have, say 2 of the members of the governing body that happen just to hear incidentally a few of the things, I don't see that being a meeting. It just kind of depends again on how long it goes on and what the topic is.
whether it's legislative or not. So like if it's about something specifically that's,
If it's about something that's going to be going before the council for a decision, like a decision making, then that's going to be more problematic. Yeah. But to answer your question is, and I'm sorry, Sanders. Okay. If you have again one person of the council talking to a constituent, and then you and someone else happen to just kind of hear a little bit of it, it's again, if it's not a decision making aspect, if they're just complaining about something down the road of their street, I don't see that being a meeting or an issue. But you just got to be very careful about what you're talking about. And then again, if you have 2 or more council members, even if it's after the meeting, that can still be a meeting. But again, what you're talking about is if you're just talking about fishing or just kind of general things that don't have to do with the governing, then it's probably not going to be an issue. Anything else?
Well, I mean, the gentleman that was said here the other day and said something to me was like, it was about something we tabled. And did not, I don't understand why you said this way, or I don't understand why you did this. Because they wanted me to explain to them why I did that. And I answered his question. So, I had sit in the audience the whole time.
That was to just someone who's not a part of the governing body.
And again, is it a topic that could be discussed? Yes. But I answered his question that he initiated from out there.
Yeah, as between you and that individual, not a meeting.
Not a meeting. Again, but I'm saying there could be incidental over here. Their ears are good.
Again, if it's incidental, it's not going to be a meeting.
Thank you. Because we have people come up regularly, they're friends of ours.
If that was the case, correct me if I'm wrong, that was the case, you were talking to them, it's about business, and then Kyle said, well, I think that we should have done it this way, that's the violation.
yeah.
Then
Once
you're talking
you-
about something, yeah.
Yes, once you interject, and it's something that, to kind of simplify the way I was told, if it's something that is before or could come before the body, you can't discuss it. So,
With the body. We have a very vocal constituent group that welcomes, that we get lots of phone calls.
Any other questions on that, particularly about meetings and?
No, sir.
So a constituent calling and talking to us about their item, is that a violation?
No, because they're not a member of a governing body, and so that would not be a meeting. Also, staff members of the city talking to each other, they're not members of the governing body, so staff members can talk about, things, they can talk about, things with the city planner can discuss things with the city attorney, and that not be a meeting. It's if you have members of the governing body discussing matters that can be a meeting. But if you're just on the phone talking to a constituent, then that alone would not be a meeting.
So then let me ask you this, if that constituent, so that's not anything that is FOIA-able, but if they send me an email about their item, is that has to be released?
So right now, for the purpose of this, we're just talking about open meetings, but that sounds like dealing with documents.
Okay, sorry.
And so, no, you're fine. And Ryan will be going through in detail on the items. No, that's a good question.
What's the role of the city attorney? He's elected, but he's not a voting member. So how is he considered a part of, obviously part of the governing body, but there has to be,
I can't vote, though. I'm not
that's what I said, you're not voting. So
No.
conversations with him are not considered meetings, correct?
If between an individual member of the governing body
Yes,
to,
one-on-one.
no.
Okay.
The city attorney is not a member of the council. For purpose of FOIA, the mayor is considered a member of council, but the city attorney would not
Just
be.
wanted that out there. I didn't think so, but I wanted that said.
Oh, she wants to clarify city clerk, too.
I assume that means city clerk as well.
Oh, yes. Also not a member of the city council and the governing body.
But can two council members talk with the attorney at the same time, or he cannot have a meeting with more than one?
Yeah, no, so there's actually case law on that where you've had, 2 or 3 members of the governing body who are talking to the attorney, either the city attorney or the county attorney, and that still was considered a meeting. So yeah, just because you're talking to the city attorney doesn't exempt you from, if you got 2 or more members of the governing body talking, that can be, depending on the subject matter as well, can be a meeting. And then Ryan, did you want to go into records or?
Okay, so thank you. Well, I like to I don't like staying behind these things, so if it's okay, I'm going to stand out here and do the talking. Also, I want to add, this is maybe like my 160th FOIA training. Oh, no kidding, over 15 years. Here is the recommendation. In the example that you were just describing, ma'am, where the constituent comes up to you after and starts speaking, we have all been in situations where I'm standing here, my friend is over here, my friend is over here, someone comes to talk to me, and we're having a conversation. At some point, I become aware that they're part of the conversation too. Because people's body language, people are now leaning in, now I feel like maybe I need to step back, so there's like a better circle, so you see what I'm saying? Everybody's had this experience, right? When that happens, you got to stop. When you become aware of this, oh, now my colleague here, now he's part of the conversation. That's when you say, we probably should take this conversation with the constituent over to the side. Does that make sense? Sure. Okay, so in terms of the communications with Steve is not a member of the governing body. So it's a very different conversation between one member with Steve than it is between one member and another member of the governing body, the city council. However, the case that Will alluded to involved where the Supreme Court said that there was a meeting. What happened was the city council in Fort Smith said, well, in order to have a meeting, and I'll poll you ready? In order to have a meeting, how many people do you think need to be present? At least 2, right? Everybody says that. I've asked that question 1,000 times. Everybody says it takes 2.
No, one can be on the phone.
So, well, then they're virtually present.
Yeah.
So that's what happened in that case. 2004, city of Fort Smith, the city council there said, hey, well, 2 people have to be present to have a meeting. What we'll do, we won't have 2 people present. We'll have the city administrator Or we could easily say Steve, and Steve will go and he will visit with this member and say, agenda item number 1, are you up or down on the vote? I'm up on the vote. I vote yes. Why do you vote yes? And he says why. Great, thank you very much. Goes to the next member individually. Agenda item number 1, are you up or down on the vote? Mike? Mike is up on the vote, and here's the reason why. What do you say? Wow, okay, I like to vote with Mike. Mike's up on the vote, I'm going to vote with Mike. Yes. Okay, and you go down the row. Everybody, Steve would never do this because this is illegal.
That's the Springdale case, isn't it?
Huh?
Wasn't that the Springdale case?
No, this is City of Fort Smith versus Harris. So what happened is the City of Fort Smith, on the one hand, you can kind of look at it back and go, oh, come on. You know, what are you doing? What are you doing? But on the other hand, you go, but no two members ever actually got together. So when I asked how many does it take to make a meeting, y'all went 2. And they said, right, but no two of the governing body ever got together. So the Supreme Court said, that's a meeting, that's a constructive meeting. And in law, something that's constructive means it's pretty much the same thing, okay? So be careful if you're talking to the city attorney or our city clerk here. The same things apply. The person can't go one to another, one to another, one to another, right? And that's different from the questions earlier about conveying information. Please see the attached memo. Please see the agenda for the meeting today. That's different from me engaging with you and getting your information and my feedback and so on. Does that make sense? Okay. So we're going to move now. We're going to move on to the records. We've got a lot of records questions.
We do.
So we're going to make that happen.
Can I ask you a question about what you just said?
Yes.
Because when you said, like a memo that's, with just informational purposes.
Right.
So I was told that if I were to send an email collectively to council members with just, do not respond, here's
Yes.
facts.
Yes.
That because if there is not deliberation or polling, that is not a violation. Is that incorrect?
It's not a violation, as you described it. What makes it not a violation is the fact that there's no exchange.
Right.
You said don't respond.
That's what made it not a violation. Don't respond to this email. This is for informational purposes only.
But if somebody responds to it, the violation occurs.
Then Steve
from
needs to
the-
jump on and say, please stop.
But I'm saying, the person who responds to that is the violator.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Does it matter if it's like to persuade an opinion about an issue?
Yes, but usually if that's the goal, that's going to come out some way in the actual content of the email. You with me? If the goal is to say, here's the agenda item, then here's the agenda item. You're going to think what you're going to think about that agenda item and what you're going to vote on it or not, right? Am I answering your question?
But what if the individual council member is indicating in the email their opinion as to how the matter ought to play out?
Don't do that.
So can I
Go ahead.
I just want to give you a specific example, because I did this.
Yeah.
We had a 26-page lease to discuss. It'd been dragging on for a long time.
Yeah.
We had a 32-item agenda. We needed to come prepared to pick through the lease. And
Right.
in my opinion, there were a lot of things that needed deep discussion.
Right.
I sent an email out, do not respond to this.
Yep.
But it said, Section 8.2, why is the city limiting this? Section 3.
Right.
And then everybody, but at the same time,
You asked
What-
questions, not stated opinions. Is that right, you're saying?
I mean,
I don't know.
I was asking question, why is the city involving itself in this? But again, it's 26 pages, but that was not necessarily a yes or no vote because the council was responsible for the document itself.
Yeah.
And so,
Okay.
anyway, that's my question, but, so is that not okay?
So the reason I said don't do that instead of that's a violation is because that's about the grayest you can get in the gray areas. So I don't want to stand here and tell you, well, for sure that's illegal. Look at this 2002 Supreme Court. I can't give you that. What we have, the reason you're going to see in a second, as soon as we shift to records, it's going to get far more technical. Okay, when we get to records, it's about to get super technical. There's definitions, there's tests, there's all kinds of stuff. We don't have that in the meetings context because, as Will said, we got off to a weird start where the definition of meeting and the FOIA itself uses the word being defined in the definition. A meeting is a meeting of a governing body. Well, what is that? And so that began in the earliest case, 1969, with the Supreme Court sort of every couple years saying that's a meeting, that's not a meeting. That's a meeting, that's not a meeting. So then you have people like me and Steve and Will and others who have to put all that together and say, if we read all these cases together, here's the best practice. Here's our best advice. So in that case that you described where you're communicating with everybody, please don't respond, here's my opinion. The please don't respond part, great. The here's my opinion part,
But now, it didn't say, here's my opinion, it said, and it's a question, because if everybody else says, well, I think it's good the city's involved here because, but there were things that needed to be dug into that
Yeah.
needed some
I
deeper
understand.
thinking.
So I'm not telling you what you did was wrong. I'm saying I would not recommend that.
Okay,
And the touchstone here, just to pull the principle out, the principle behind all of these cases and all is that the discussion needs to happen in public. The statement about, hey, I don't like item number 5 because of X, Y, and Z, please don't respond, but I don't like, that is supposed to happen here. So anybody can come and see, because they may not know, oh, I can make a FOIA request for the records there. They may not know. But since the meetings have to be recorded, they ought to be able to go back or either attend and see. So the kind of sharing with people your opinions on whatever the issues are, this is the place for that. And when you get into the records context where you're putting that stuff in an email, that's where I say it gets really gray, so avoid that. Is that fair?
yep, I got one more question.
Okay.
So, this lease, this is an ongoing thing, it hadn't been put to bed yet. So there was a pretty substantial question recently, and it's gonna need some more discussion. So when we follow that, and because, again, this is an internal document that the council's responsible for approving the draft, not necessarily the yes or no vote, we're gonna change the zoning. But if we, like in this instance, there was a question, and so everything was tabled until that question was answered. Most
Okay.
likely, that's gonna come back with, okay, well, it needs more discussion. So if we don't have any information before our next meeting, like, hey, this came back, the council needs to start considering this viewpoint, then we kick it, so we were gonna meet in February,
It
and then
makes
we're
it
gonna say,
slow.
hey,
Yeah.
let's meet in
Yep.
March, you know what I'm,
Yep.
so
I
that's.
totally get it. Yes.
You just discuss it one issue at a month, okay?
There are other ways to communicate information. Here's the agenda, here's the packet that goes with item number, blah, blah, blah. People, encourage you to read this before the meeting so people can come ready. You can do those things. All that's totally fine. And that does help speed some things along. But the way the FOIA interacts with governing bodies, it interacts with them in such a way that it requires the expression of opinions to take place in a public setting, which slows things down. As everybody knows, the more people on a governing body, the harder it is to get everybody together. Why? Because everybody's got a bunch of different schedules. That slows it down. And that's just the reality.
So it might be more of a phrasing, if you say, do not respond to this, please consider sections 1 and 7 before the meeting or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's not giving my opinion, but that's calling attention, like, there's 26 pages, these are big touch points.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
All right, any other questions on meetings?
Well, I'm curious, and I don't want to jump ahead, are you gonna get into, I'm not trying to stump you with a number, but this may ring a bell with you, with that, Attorney General Opinion 99/018?
What is that about?
Well, it's based off of Q&A, it says that 2 city council members meet to discuss matters on which foreseeable action will be taken. Is the FOA violated? The answer is one of those, well, possibly.
But we've explained why possibly. Will has said possibly depends on the context in which you're meeting, depends on what you talk about. So what you're wanting to get from me is a degree of specificity that you're about to get with a fire hose on records. I can't give it to you on meetings. The reason I can't give it to you on meetings is because it doesn't exist. The most we can give you is what the court has said over time. And what the court has said over time is a very clear instance of polling. I gave that example. No two members ever actually got together. Court said, hey, that's a constructive meeting. That's a meeting. You've got other situations in which you have a less than a quorum getting together to talk about matters that they know will come before the governing body or that likely will come before the governing body. That's a meeting. They're going to have tons of different situations that are going to be on the margins of all of those, which is why we try to give the best practice, like what I was just saying, you know, the example. Everybody has that feeling of like, oh, now there's more people listening to this conversation, right? And when that happens, you have some awareness on that and say, oh, we probably need to your constituent, probably need to take this over just the two of us. Okay? All right, let's move on to records. So remember I said that there's these three questions. Is the entity covered? We're always going to answer that yes with respect to y'all. The next question we're going to cover, question 2, is the record covered? And then we'll go to question 3, are there any exemptions? And when we conclude that third question, I'm also going to go into how you actually respond to FOIA requests. And we're going to get into questions of who's the custodian and who's responsible to get records and how's that supposed to work, all right? So I'm giving you a preview of coming attractions. We're going to spend perhaps a surprising amount of time on question number 2. For your very good Senior Tequila question, there's a heck of a lot of confusion about what even is a public record in the first place. So let's move on to that. Question 2, is the record covered? The FOIA gives a giant 75-plus word definition of a public record. And I've broken it down into these elements. For the purposes of the FOIA, a public record is a writing, a recording, electronic information, right? That's an email. It's an audio recording, video recording, whatever, a text message. A writing, recording, or other electronic information is defined as, you see how I emphasize that? Remember that, we're going to come back to that, is defined as a public record only if it is both kept and, this is the key, constitutes a record of the performance or lack of performance of official functions.
Define that part.
We're going to get into it.
Okay.
Constitutes a record of performance or lack of performance of official functions. Let's talk about kept first. So the FOIA originally said, all the things I just said, but what it said was, is required by law to be kept and constitutes a record of the performance, lack of performance. And so what would happen is people would make a FOIA request for a document they knew to exist. And the custodian would say, is this the one you're asking about? And they'd say, yes, that's the one. And they say, well, I'm not required by law to keep this, so it's not a public record. You can't get it. So that's the reason why the FOIA was then amended later to say, now today it says, in a very confusing phrase, is required by law to be kept or is otherwise kept. So I just elided that to say, is kept. Now, we all know that the questions that you may have pertain most likely to electronic records. I'm going to give a running start to answer those questions. Anytime you have electronic records type questions, the best way to start thinking about that is to ask that question about a piece of paper. So when we're talking about a record being kept, if I take that top sheet of that piece of paper there and I have it on my desk, is it kept? Now I ask you questions. Is it kept? Yes, yes sir, it's kept. Absolutely.
It exists.
It doesn't. It does exist. That's true. We'll test that in a second. If I take that same piece of paper, I fold it in half, and I put it in the trash can, is it kept?
Yes.
Has anybody ever accidentally thrown something away?
Never.
Right. And when you do, what do you do if the trash hasn't come yet?
Take it out.
Fair enough? You take it out.
Still kept.
Bam, there it is. That's why I encourage you to fold your things instead of crumple. Okay, fold. If you're like me, you know, don't crumple, fold. You just pull it back, no problem. If I take that piece of paper that I folded carefully and put into the trash can, and instead of putting it into the trash can, I put it through a shredder. And not just any shredder, the kind of shredder that does the diamond cut. You know what I'm saying? Where, like, is it kept then?
No.
But doesn't it still exist?
In shredded form.
Yeah, and aren't there people who have the skill and the patience and maybe the technology to reassemble that. They work for the CIA.
They can have that trash barrel and put that together.
But listen to my question. It's a real question, and this is important for purpose of the electronic stuff we're about to get to. Is that record, is it possible?
It is possible.
It's possible, but you would have to have specialized training, you have to have specialized equipment, and you have to have a specialized character with a heck of a lot of patience. And time. So it exists, it's possible to reconstitute that shredded document, but everybody sort of recognizes immediately, you're like, yeah, that's not kept. All right. So let's take those 3 stages that we just walked through. It's on my desk, it's folded up in my trash can, it's shredded. Now let's ask the same question about an email. Let's ask the same question about a text message. If I have an email and it's in my email inbox, is it kept? It's like the piece of paper on the table. If I have an email and I take it from my email inbox and I press delete, is it kept?
Not until you delete the trash.
So it's still kept?
Yes.
It's kept, right? It's like when I folded it up and put it in the thing. Because like all of us who've accidentally deleted an email, we go back into the trash, we pull that thing back out of there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If I double delete, I go into the trash, an empty recycle bin, is it kept?
Not for my purposes.
Maybe, if it's on the cloud or something.
Yeah, that's the true answer. The answer, is our IT guy here? There he is, he knows. The answer is, it depends on how long your IT guy has set your server to keep double deleted things.
What's the answer to that? 14 days?
The default is 14 days. I have not changed it.
Thank you.
There you go. So after the 14th day, during the 14-day window, your IT guy could probably go on there and pull it back, no problem. After the 14-day window, that digital information is like the shredded bits of paper. It's possible for people with high-level IT skills and a lot of other skills in technology and patience, maybe to reassemble that. So I want you to see the parity there, okay? So in terms of kept, just think about paper first and then ask the analog for electronic, okay? We haven't even gotten to that second element there, constitutes a record. All we're talking about right now is kept. This is a bigger and bigger deal because more and more records are electronic. When I first started doing this stuff in 2008, nobody was talking about text messages in public documents. People were talking about paper being, do I have to take the paper? They want it scanned. Do I have to take the paper and scan it? That was the dispute then. And it's easy to analyze when the paper is kept. Now, it's a different world, and more records are being created in an electronic format, and so on, okay? So, let's look at our definition. A writing, recording, electronic information is defined as a public record only if it is both kept, we've covered that, and constitutes a record of the performance or lack of performance of, we'll say, your official functions. Ma'am, I ask you, the Senior Tequila email. I love your question because 1,000 times I have said the following. If I, on my AG email account, using my AG computer during business hours, you always got to add that because people add crazy things to the FOIA, okay? You'll notice that that's not on the list if it's during business hours, okay? Send an email to my wife that says, Costco list, or whatever grocery store we tend to be shopping at that time. When you go to the Costco today, don't forget the giant thing of eggs, and be sure to get some of the gummy things the kids like, okay? I send it. Is that a public record? Same kind of question you're asking. Is that a public record? We have a no. Do we have any yeses? We have 2 no's. We have a yes. Any more no? Going once. So we got a 2 no's. We got a what? What's the reason why you think it's no?
Because that is my function.
It constitutes the record of a performance or lack of performance, and that's not an official function.
Okay, good. And what's the reason why you think yes?
Well, maybe I need to change mine because I do think probably, is it based upon the subject matter?
Yes.
Okay, so then I'll change mine.
Okay.
Unless Costco is the subject matter.
of what your official functions are?
Yeah, I don't know.
I suspect y'all's official
It's not in
functions
Sherwood right
don't
now.
include the Costco.
Exactly.
But maybe I'm wrong. So the answer to that, let me finish the round and then we'll come back. The answer to that question is no. When you email the so-and-so and, hey, let's meet at the place, let's go to that email, even though it's on my AG computer, even though it's on my AG email account, even though I send it during business hours, it doesn't constitute a record of the performance of my official functions.
Even though it's not, because what was told to me is it's not exempted, it's not an,
Right.
if it's not named as an exemption, then
Right.
it's not exempt.
Beautiful. I'm going to give you some candy after.
Okay.
That's wonderful. So remember what I said. Majority of the confusion in FOIA is a failure to sequence the questions properly.
Okay.
Right now, we're asking the question, is that a public record? We don't get to the question of exemptions unless we've antecedently determined that it is a public record. And we're asking the question now, is the Costco list a public record? No. Is the Meet Me at the Senior Tequila, is that a public record? Yeah. No. So notice how simple it becomes, my friend. Notice how simple it becomes if you sequence the questions. You have to ask the right question at the right time, otherwise you can get confused, you know? So, yes, you had a follow-up.
When the requesters ask for Marina, any and all emails I've ever sent to Marina, or any city council meeting, like
Right.
I said, we do all these charity things together.
Yeah.
So she's got buku, she's got pictures probably of my great grandkids.
Sure. Yeah.
Are you kidding me? I've got every picture of her great-grandkid.
The comment is,
Yeah.
when they want every email that's not anything to do with my official business.
It's going to include things that are official and include things that are not official.
Right.
Yeah. To your point about being broad. It's overbroad. We're gonna get to how to deal with that later. Right now, we're asking the question, is it a public record?
Gotcha.
So, remember I said that second in the middle there is defined as. I have been puzzled over my time writing about the FOIA, training people on the FOIA, litigating on the FOIA. At one point, I wrote legislation on the FOIA. Why is there so much confusion at this stage? Why is it that people automatically go, well, did you send your Costco list during business hours? Where are people getting this stuff? I've asked myself repeatedly. And the best answer I can come up with is the bottom part. That's not an empty little bracket there. There's another half here. And what I have found is that when you find that people are confused, the best way to learn and the best way to train is to explain the confusion. Don't just say the right answer, but also explain how it is that people can get confused, right? So in my experience, my opinion, this is the reason why people are confused on this. The text of the FOIA, remember I said at the top, a writing, recording, or other electronic information is defined as. It gives the definition. And I said it was a 75-word plus definition. The last sentence of that definition creates a presumption. And it says a writing, a recording, or electronic information is presumed to meet the definition of a public record if it is either held by an entity covered by the FOIA or held by a public employee within the scope of that person's employment. This is not a new definition of public record. It's what we call an evidentiary presumption. It establishes a default. If you maintaining the Senior Tequila thing, or me the Costco list, and there it is, it's maintained by an entity covered by the FOIA or by a public employee within the scope of that person's employment, it is presumed to be a public record. It's not made a public record because there's a definition for it. But we presume it to be a public record, and that presumption is rebuttable by looking at the content of the document. Okay? So what I believe the source of the confusion is that people don't appreciate the distinction between the definition of a public record and the evidentiary presumption of which documents are public records, and that that presumption can be rebutted. Does that make sense? What I have told you, I feel like I alone have escaped to tell you these things, right? Few people appreciate what I've been saying, and I feel like in many ways I've been kind of on a crusade all of these years to try and help people understand this. And what I am saying is undisputed by people who are experts in this. But for some reason, it doesn't get out to public officials. It doesn't get out to citizens. Questions on, we're about to leave step 2. Is it a public record? Questions on this. Yes, ma'am.
So if we received an email from a constituent, then
Good,
it,
yeah.
because that is part of our function, if they're
Yeah.
asking us, so that is, right, because that, you share that under FOIA.
Class?
Yes.
What
Yes.
say you? Yes.
Yep.
Is it a writing? Electronic information? Check. Is it kept? Check.
Yes.
Does it reflect the performance or lack of performance of my official functions as city council member, Ward 1, Position 1? Check. Public record. Other questions on this? Once you have the stops on the train here, it becomes super simple, right? Is it a writing, recorded electronic information? Check. Is it kept? Check. So, for example, let me give you a reason why the kept matters. You can't request a record that doesn't exist. This happened today. I saw a FOIA request. Somebody requested a document that may be created sometime in the future, but doesn't exist today. This is why you can't make continuing FOIA requests. You can only request public records. What's a public record? Well, among the other things, it must exist. It must be kept. So I can't, it's an improper FOIA request for records for me to say, I'd like to see whatever, the minutes or the agenda for the meeting, and let this be a standing request. Every time you create minutes, send them to me. That's not a legitimate FOIA request because you're requesting things that don't even exist yet. You're entitled to come back and make that request at another time. The record exists now, you're entitled to it, okay? So you have these steps, you check these boxes, boom, 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 public record. Or not a public record, whatever the case is, all right?
Do you have to, if it's, so like, we're trying to put as much out there in the public record as we can, the minutes, you can watch the meetings, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. So do we have to produce copies of minutes if they're readily available on the website?
Yes. Right now, there is no, it's not permissible to say, here it is, it's available on the website, you can find it. You got to turn it over.
You don't have to do hard copy, you can send it to them electronically.
You-
That's why they request.
If they ask for it electronically, you can send it to them electronically. If they ask for paper copies, you send them paper copies. We'll get to the how to respond stuff in a little bit. Questions on what is a public record? Yes,
So
sir.
I got a question about the KEP. We keep
Yes,
talking
sir.
about this KEP. So if somebody sends me an email 45 days ago
Right.
saying something about something in our ward, and I
Yes.
deleted that email
Yes.
45 days ago.
Yes,
We've already established the 14-day thing. That it's not kept at that point.
that's correct.
It's not kept at that point.
That's correct.
Okay.
And then the upshot is, for the benefit of our friends, the upshot of it not being kept is nothing to turn over. Not a public record. Yeah.
And if the question's asked, then we have a record that our default for the city is 14 days.
Right.
It's a public,
Right. Now,
huh?
you cannot, no one's suggesting this, but I want to make sure that I'm not misunderstood. Go ahead, Steve.
I think there's a differentiation between if you got an email and you've still got it.
Right.
And the 14 days. Okay.
Yeah. No one's suggesting what I'm about to say, but I want to make sure that I'm not being misunderstood. Once a FOIA request comes in, it's frozen. We can't delete stuff. But if you have in the normal course of business, that's fine. That's fine.
I try to delete mine every Sunday.
Yeah. And so to Steve's point, it's not that all the emails are gone after 14 days. It's the stuff that you double delete that rolls off the server. Other questions on step 2, is it a public record? So I want you to see, before we move on, how many questions this resolves. Most people think about the FOIA only in terms of exemptions. Notice how many questions this resolves. Important that people be equipped, and informed, especially public officials, about this part of the FOIA. We're getting ready to move on now. We good? All right, here we go. So we've determined the entity is covered by the FOIA. We're carefully sequencing our analysis. We've determined that the record is a public record. Now we ask, are there any exemptions? We do not ask, are there any exemptions, before we've determined that it's a public record, because why? Only public records can be exempt in the first place.
If it's not a public record, how could it be exempt?
Exactly right. I've been saying this all these years. All right.
We're just catching on.
Do you need me to be your spokesperson?
Huh?
Said, do you need me to be your spokesperson?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
All right, question 3, I just want to have you see the sources of the different kinds of exemptions. There's statutory sources contained in the FOIA itself. There's about 6 exemptions in the FOIA itself. And then there are many, many other FOIA exemptions that are contained in other statutes outside the FOIA, both state and federal. Anything that's going to make information or a record confidential under federal law is going to be incorporated into the FOIA by a provision in the FOIA itself, which we can get into if you're interested in that. There's also some constitutional exemptions. We obviously don't have time to cover all of these things. This is weeks and weeks of training. What we're going to do is cover the main idea that is behind most exemptions, and then we're going to cover personnel records and employee evaluations. And what I want to camp out here for a second, I hope you recognize this key idea underlying many exemptions. Shield the deliberative process, make the product public. This is the key idea underlying many exemptions. Shield some kind of deliberative process, and then make the product, under certain circumstances, make it public. The reason I said I hope you recognize this exemption is this is the basis for the executive session exemptions for personnel matters. This is just in the records context. To shield some kind of conversation, but then to make the product of that conversation, a vote, for example, to make that public after. Right? If you have an executive session for personnel matters, that conversation is shielded. And then, if you decide, yep, we're going to discipline so-and-so, yep, we're going to hire so-and-so, whatever the decision is, you have to come out in public and you got to make that vote in public. You don't have to rehash all the discussion. Why? Because that was a legitimate, we're assuming, a legitimate personnel records executive session, and so the discussion is shielded, but not the product. If you fail to vote in public on a personnel matters executive session, the decision arrived at is void. So you see what I'm saying here. Shield delivery process, make the product final. That idea is behind what I think you're probably familiar with in the context of executive sessions. It's also behind several exemptions. Let's look at a few. Personnel files. Probably you've seen FOI requests from somebody say, I would like Jane Doe's personnel file, please. I want the whole thing. Don't leave anything out. The FOIA doesn't know what that word means. The FOIA has a list of definitions, and that's not in it. That's a HR word. As a practical matter, we sort of know what's in somebody's personnel file is going to be divided into 2 mutually exclusive categories: personnel records and employee evaluation documents. So these are the workhorse exemptions that we're going to cover here. You all, as elected officials, have personnel records. You do not have employee evaluation records. People over whom you have authority, they're going to have personnel records and evals. They're going to have one but not the other, all right? So in somebody's personnel file, you're going to find personnel records. What is that? The FOIA doesn't define that term. AG opinions over the years, and by over the years I mean about 40 years, about 4 decades, have defined personnel records to be a document that is about a public official or a public employee, and it's not an evaluation. So to really know what that is, you got to know what's an eval. We're going to get there. And that definition, too, for about 40 years, the AG's office has said, we think this is what an eval is. It's not defined in the FOIA. And then in 2014, the Arkansas Supreme Court came along and said, we think that's the definition, too. Okay? So in a second, we're going to round this out. Right now, for our purposes, what you need to know, personnel record is something that's about an individual employee or official, y'all. That's not an eval. Now, if it meets that classification, here is the test for disclosure. that record must be, you see how I emphasize disclosed? That's, as my daughter used to say when she was little, that is on a purpose. It's not to be fancy. It is on a purpose. That personnel record must be disclosed unless, that's our test, going to be disclosed unless doing so would be a clearly unwarranted invasion of the personal privacy of that person, whose ever record it is, all right? One of the very first FOIA seminars I ever gave, 2008, 2009, it was a room of city clerks, of county treasurers, of county collectors. It was some kind of conference. And I got to this part of what was then what was the version at that time of this presentation, and a very brave soul on the front row raised her hand. And she asked a question in front of all her colleagues, and she said, "Wait a minute. You mean the test for disclosure is such and such?" I said, "Yeah, that's right." And she said, "Oh, no. All these years, I thought it was the reverse." And so she's kind of told on herself, all of these years, I have been disclosing what I shouldn't and keeping what I should disclose. Why? Because she got what I bolded and underlined right there wrong. And we're going to see that in just a second for the evals. We're going to come back to it. And then I'm going to tell you more specifically what my friend said on the front row that day. So right now we're asking the question, is this a personnel record? Yes, it's about a particular person, you perhaps, or a city employee, and it's not an evaluation. What is an evaluation? An employee evaluation is a document that is created by or at the behest of the employer to evaluate the employee. Again, I say, this is a definition hammered out AG's office for about 4 decades. The Supreme Court approved in the I think it's 2014 or 2012, in a case called Thomas v. Hall. If I write a letter of commendation to Will about his epic presentation on meetings to the city of Sherwood, is that an eval? No. You now have the definition in front of you. Is it created by or at the behest of the employer? Maybe you don't know. Will works for me.
Yes.
All right. And does it evaluate him?
Well, yeah.
Yes! It says he did a great job. Some evals are good. This is important when we get to the test for disclosure. Some evals are good. And what you're going to see in a second is that those can never be disclosed. And this is why my friend was confused that day. If Will comes to me and he says, "Hey, my next door neighbor is super loud all the time and is unprofessional and all these terrible things." And I say to Will, "Okay, put all that in writing and I'm going to look into it." And he sends me an email with all the things that he thinks are problematic. Is that email an employee evaluation of the person being complained against? Look at the definition.
No, it's not, well, it's not you're not the employer, right?
Will works for me.
Okay, and he's your next door
So,
neighbor?
is it created at my behest? Yes. Yes, it is. And it's created because I said, I'm going to look into it. I'm going to evaluate that person, figure out what's going on. That's an eval. If Will sends me the very same document, just on his own, it's not created by me, it's not created at my behest. Not an eval. All right, now you have the definition of an eval. You can sort of backflow that into the personnel records. What's a personnel record? It's a public record, we've already determined that. That's about a public official or public employee. That's not an eval. It's not the thing we just talked about. Now, when we determine what we're looking at as an eval, how do we decide what to do with it? The test is that eval must be withheld unless it meets a very specific 4-part conjunctive test, which we're about to look at. But I want to freeze for a moment, and as a hat tip and an honor to that person on the front row those years ago, this is the reason why she was confused. If you look at the tests for personnel records, once you determine we're dealing with a personnel record, this is relevant to you personally. Once you determine you're dealing with a personnel record, our stance with respect to its disclosure is it must be disclosed unless it meets the test. The eval is the exact opposite. And that's where the person was confused. She had the idea that just like a personnel record, once we classify it as a personnel record, once we classify it as an eval, we're going to disclose that thing, unless. But notice how it's flipped. Everybody see that? It's very important you see that with me. Everybody see what I'm talking about? You with me? Okay, so where I've underlined and bolded, disclose in personnel records. If it meets the classification of personnel records, we're going to disclose it. If it meets the classification of an eval, we're going to withhold it. That's what I'm talking about. That's the asymmetry I'm talking about. We're going to disclose the personnel record unless it meets the test. The eval, we're going to withhold it unless it meets the test. And we're just going to rifle through these four parts here. Unless what? What's the test? Unless the person was suspended or fired, that thing is final. The records are relevant to that, and there's a compelling public interest in the disclosure of that record. That's why letters of commendation cannot be disclosed. That's why written reprimands that don't lead to suspensions or termination cannot be disclosed. What this means is that only the worst evals get disclosed, which is perhaps why people often sort of reflexively think you can't have a good eval because you don't see them very often in response to a FOIA request. Now, the employee, him or herself, they can release their own stuff. It's personal to them. They can release it, that's fine. But the custodian can't, on his or her own, release something contrary to these tests. So what this means is only the worst evals go out. Remember what I said before, to shield some kind of deliberative process and make the product final. Remember that? And you all have that experience in the executive session context. That's what's happening here in the eval context. The rationale behind this, why would you beat that only the worst evals go out? The idea is, well, if the entire employer-employee relationship is a fishbowl, then perhaps there won't be the kind of candor that you would hope to have between an employer and an employee about that person's performance, how he or she can improve, what they're doing well, those kind of things. There wouldn't be candor, perhaps, because it would be a fishbowl. And if it were a fishbowl, then that relationship wouldn't be as good as it might otherwise be, which means you're going to have employment situations that would not be very good. You're setting them up, and that's not good for citizens. So we're going to make that process shielded, the evaluation process shielded, unless what happened was so bad the public needs to know. And how do we know if it's so bad they need to know? Those four parts are met.
What do you mean by the discipline is final? I mean, because you've got suspended or
Appeal
fired is number one.
Right.
so.
Appeal process.
That's
You
right.
have an appeal process.
Yeah, it's administratively final. So somebody could be suspended, and then they have some internal administrative appeal process, and until that process is exhausted or not availed of, it's not yet final.
Okay.
We weren't allowed at the state to release any personnel records without notifying the employee.
Yep, that goes to how to respond to requests. We'll get there.
Will you give us an example of what is a personnel record that could be about a public official? Like, what is an example that you said we might have these?
Yeah. The email that you described earlier that you sent about the agenda item, that's your personnel record.
Okay.
It's about you, and it's not your eval. You don't have evals.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
Other questions on this? Okay. Here's some info that's commonly exempted in personnel records. This is obviously personal to you, and you would expect these kinds of things. Your Social Security info is exempt. Your an employee's tax withholding information, that's exempt. So as a practical matter, what this means is, since insurance, pension, benefit, tax info, withholding, all that stuff is exempt, what you get when you request somebody's pay stub, what you should get is the gross pay. If you get net pay and gross pay, you're disclosing the aggregate of what's being withheld, which is not consistent here. Somebody's marital status, information about dependents, there's very little public interest or legitimate public interest in those kind of things, and there's often some privacy interests that outweigh that, right? Stuff that's often open, I mean, every week, that's not an exaggeration, every week, on average, I should say, somebody somehow calls me, finds out my name or my number, whatever. You mean somebody can, under the FOIA, can find out how much I make? And they're public employee. I'm like, that's part of the deal. That's part of the deal. Yes. We'll skip this one, working papers, in the interest of time. Now, so we're done with sort of the doctrine part, right? Remember I told you, y'all were kind of chomping at the bit on the meeting stuff. You want more specificity, you want more technical detail, you got it on records. How do you respond to FOIA requests? Making them, very simple. You can make a FOIA request orally, in an email, over the phone. You can stop somebody in the hall. You got to remember the FOIA is 1967 law. That's been amended a couple of times in big wholesale amendments. The FOIA was amended in 2001 to bring it into the electronic age. That's when you're supposed to laugh. Yeah, right? It was 6 years before the iPhone. Now, there's been other amendments since then, of course, but that was a wholesale, big picture effort to overhaul the FOIA and bring it into the electronic age. To take, before 2001, there were questions about whether you could even mail in a FOIA request, or whether you could only make it in person. People can forget that. Then when the person makes the FOIA request, this goes to the question earlier about the breadth of the request. The request itself has to be detailed enough to enable the custodian to locate the records with reasonable effort. A classic example I give, my clerks, I say if somebody walks in and they say, I'd like all the records and all those file cabinets back there. It doesn't work so much anymore. It worked really well in 2008, 2009. Okay, things are digitized now, but you get the point. I want all that stuff. I say that's a classic example of something that's not sufficiently specific to enable the custodian to locate the public records with reasonable effort. Remember I said start with paper and then go to electronic. So the electronic analog is give me all the friggin' emails. Give me all the emails from everybody, ever. That's the electronic version of give me all those stuff in the file cabinets back there. Because the FOIA is designed for a 3 business day turnaround, max, otherwise immediately. And there are no exceptions. There is no provision in the FOIA that allows a custodian to say, hey, can we agree to an extension? If you do, great. I often do that when I'm helping people respond. But there is you're outside the FOIA at that time. And as a practical matter, if somebody agrees and you follow through with the agreement and they come later and say, well, Judge, wisdom came late and I should have never agreed to that. And they should have given me the documents after 3 business days, like the FOIA says. The judge is not going to, look, you can't come in here and they did what y'all agreed to and me do something different. The person can request records in any medium. That's a defined term. That's a term of art. Any medium in which the record exists or is readily available. The FOIA defines medium. That was the 2001 amendment. In the 2001 amendment, medium is it paper? Is it a PDF? Is it a audio file? Whatever that is, my friend could tell me. Is it a video file, right? Medium is not format. Format is .docx, .xl, or whatever the Excel, that goes to format. The particular electronic, the software, basically. Medium, so somebody can say, this used to be the question, can they request it in electronic format? It doesn't exist in electronic format. It's a piece of paper. And the answer the FOIA gives is you must give them the electronic document if you have the means, if it's readily available in electronic format. How do you know if a document that only exists in paper is readily available? Can you scan it? Do you have the scanning equipment to make that happen? And so over time, There was an opinion request that I drafted for a prior Attorney General, I want to say 2009-ish, where I believe it was a city official who said, when we get requests for people, they say, hey, we want these set of documents. It's 5,000 pages. And they had read the statute. And they said, our scanning equipment is that kind, y'all remember these, that sat on top of the desk? And it had a hinge, and you just lift up the one, and it can put one page.
That's what's at my house too.
There you go. You close the lid, you press the scan, and you look hopelessly at the computer screen as it goes, scanning, 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 bling, and then you go 4,999, 4,900, right? And so we said, that's not readily available. Today, most of us have the copier scanner things that do everything but like make you coffee, you know? You just put the stuff on there, press the scan, and however many minutes later, there it is, right? So whether it's readily available does not really go to the number of records or whatever. It goes to the ability of you to scan it based on what you have, okay? So that's how to make FOIA requests. Now how to respond. This is where we get to the custodian aspect. Okay, so let me just, there was a time, like in about seminar like 40 or 50, where I knew all the slides, and so I can have the benefit of that. It's okay, Will. So, oh, perfect.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you. My thing must have died. Okay, so 4 steps to evaluate the request when you receive it. First, once requested. It's surprising how often people go, freaking request, I don't want to do it. Then you look how long you have to respond. We're going to evaluate the records. Would you click through that? We're going to evaluate the records. We're going to prep and send. The reason why I put step 1 is because that's where the custodian comes in. What's requested? Is it detailed enough? That goes to the, is it sufficiently specific to enable you to locate the records with reasonable effort? If it's not, you can ask for clarification. Hey, when you ask for every travel and expense reimbursement ever, are you really asking for the mayor's travel expense reimbursement from last week's conference? Yeah, that's the one. Okay, great. We can give that to you, no problem. You can ask for clarification, that's fine. You have to determine right then if it's a personnel record or eval. To the question earlier, at this stage, there's a special clock, an extra clock that ticks. A clock on notice, a clock on coming to the AG's office and saying, the custodian wants to release my name and salary. Tell them they can't do it, right? There's other clocks that start to tick for personnel records and evals. You want to know of that? Right up front. If somebody requests stuff that pertains to you, it's your personnel record, you're entitled to notice. So are the employees. This is where the who's the custodian comes into play. Now, this is usually very clear in an entity that's hierarchical, that it comes up to a point, right? So y'all don't come to a point, you come to a group, right? You're a governing body, you're a deliberative body. My friends at the police department, they come to a point. There's a hierarchical arrangement there, and what I always tell people is, whoever is at the top, that's the one. Because he or she has the administrative control over every document in that, whatever it is, office, agency, commission, whatever, okay? What is administrative control? That's a term that's been defined by the Supreme Court and it's worked its way into the cases. What I say, what administrative control is, it's that you have the authority to tell someone to get you the stuff. And they have to listen to you and do the thing, as long as it's legal and ethical and all the things, because that's part of their job. Who is the custodian? It's defined in the FOIA, 2519-103, page 5 of the booklet, there in front of you. Bottom right corner. She's going to check me out there. Check me out.
I think
You'll
we're all
see.
going to check you out.
Okay, go for it.
While they're looking for that, we can submit a request under FOIA.
Any Arkansas citizen.
Do you have the ability to verify that they're an Arkansas citizen?
Yes.
By what means?
Ask for proof of Arkansas citizenship. And what I usually say is, a copy or a scan of your driver's license would be fine, voter registration card is fine, some information that indicates that you are an Arkansas citizen. Yeah. So So a custodian is someone who has administrative control over the public records. A custodian is the definition of custodian in the FOIA specifically excludes from being a custodian anybody who holds public records solely for the purpose of safekeeping, data maintenance, electronic, blah, 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 blah. So my friend, you, sir, are not the custodian. IT people are not custodians. They are excluded from the definition of being custodians in the FOIA itself. And that language, as it was added to the FOIA in 2001, it came along with I think it's about 70 pages, 75 pages, commentary from the group who put those recommendations together. And it's an unusual situation in law where you can have the people who made the recommendations tell you all about it. And then you look and say, legislature approved. They made that recommendation. Now it's part of the law. What did they have in mind? You look and see, this provision here that I'm pointing you to, it specifically says, therefore, IT departments, and it's speaking about the state, like the Department of Information Systems, which is like the state IT guys, are not custodians. So you cannot send a FOIA request to an IT group and expect that they'll be able to respond. So when I train people, I also train people how to make FOIA requests. When you make a FOIA request, I always say aim for the top of the organizations where they have that kind of hierarchical structure, because whoever that person is, he or she may not actually fulfill the duties of the custodian. They may have delegated that to someone else, and that's perfectly fine. But you might not know who that is. So aim for the top, and then it'll get to that person, and that person will say, oh yeah, so-and-so does that, and they'll forward along, and then they'll do what they're supposed to do. Great. How do you do that for something like this, where you don't come to a point, you come to a group? It's the reverse, right? It's the inverse. And the answer is there has to be a custodian who can receive public records requests. So each of you are creating public records. We've talked about different ways that you do that, through emails, text messages, whatever. All that's fine. You're creating public records. Some of those are also your personnel records. You yourself will have to search your own stuff, unless, I should go back. Remember when we carefully went through the definition of a public record? You notice what was absent from that slide was any reference to whether it was your official account. Was it? I didn't say, that's why I had, during business hours, right? On my AG computer, right? But there's an analog to that. What if I use a personal cell phone to send and receive text messages about my official functions at the AG's office? It's on my personal device. It's on my personal email, perhaps. Does that make it not a public record? No. It's totally absent from the FOIA doesn't care where the record is, except for the presumption. But we already were careful to see. It was just a presumption. The FOIA doesn't care if you use your personal device. The FOIA doesn't care if you use your personal email. What the FOIA cares about is, say it together, a writing, electronic recording, audio, visual that is kept that constitutes performance or lack of performance of official functions. And that could be on your personal device as well. I can't come and search your personal device. Probably the IT guy can't either, or you don't want him to. Somebody has to find the records. And if you maintain control and custody over the device, and it's your personal device, you have to search for that stuff. So how I train, I'll cut to the chase here, how I train people who have these kind of, we don't come to a point, we come to a group. How do we handle that? There's got to be a point person who can receive the FOIA request from the person who makes it. Then that person receives it. That person sends that FOIA request out to all the members of the governing body and says, please see the attached FOIA request, which we received today at such and such a time. Our response is due at this time on this day. Please search all your devices for responsive records and send me anything that you have that is responsive to these requests.
Stop right there.
Yes, ma'am.
Who's that? Who? And send me.
Yep.
Elaborate.
It can be whoever is determined to be that person. It could be Steve, not trying to give you the job.
I mean, but see, I think
It's
Steve-
me a lot of the time.
There you go.
I mean, I think it is Steve.
Right.
Because that's how, that's what I'm used
Yeah.
to, is that
Well,
we would send it
but
from
it
our
was
agency
Bailey,
to the
if we
city,
have.
not the city attorney,
to the lawyers.
Agency's attorney, and
Yep.
they called it and sent it on.
Yep. The FOIA doesn't care who it is. There just has to be a point person.
See, it seems like to me, the last couple of times we've had them, well, of course, we had Bailey in the police department who we used a lot. But we've also just willy-nilly just send them on ourselves to the person who has requested and not even copied our attorney.
Yeah.
Just send them on to the requesting party.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the correct way to do it. And that's what we've been told to do. And I don't think that's the correct way to do it because we don't have any backup then what we've done. We're just doing it ourselves. And I don't think that's the correct way to do it. And I think when someone requests a FOI, it should be come in centrally. We're getting FOI requests in, also they're not even coming in centrally they're coming into us individually sometimes, not even coming in centrally.
Yeah.
What we run into is we have requesters that are adamant that they want the document or the information to come from the person they asked for it from. Even though council members will send me their responses that I will then forward to the requester.
Yes.
But they're objecting to that. And I don't think there's anything in the rules that say that it absolutely has to come from the person. They just have to get the documentation they're entitled to.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So sending it to Steve and him sending it on, that requester cannot deny it. They can say
I mean, they can be upset, but they don't have a right to
they don't
be
have a
upset.
right to deny it.
You can't, a FOIA requester doesn't have the right to decide from whom they receive the documents.
Gotcha.
They have the right, you can think about the fishing pole, the fishing line. You throw that hook out there, the FOIA hook, what's it pull back? It pulls back public records that are not exempt. That's what you're entitled to. You're not entitled as a FOIA requester to determine, well, I want the mayor to be the one to respond to me. Well, no, that's not how we do it. We have Steve respond. That's what we do. Is there an issue that you have with the records or whether they're exempt, right? So it is best practice to have an intake person. But look, when you're like this as an organization, it's easier to maintain that. When you're like this as an organization, you're going to have a lot of different doors through which those FOIA requests could come.
And they can be filtered.
So the best practice is you can receive a FOIA request, and it's probably legit. You have to respond. And when you're not the custodian of the records, you have to respond by saying, I'm not the custodian, this person is. So in your situation, if you receive stuff individually, all these different doors, each one of you is a door, then the best practice is to say, thank you for the FOIA request. We forwarded it along to our point person. We'll get back to you within the appropriate amount of time.
So if I were to get a FOI request individually, for instance, then should I forward it to the city attorney if he, in fact, were to be the custodian of the records? And then,
I'm not the
No,
custodian.
you're the custodian.
I'm the custodian. If he's the point person, I'm saying, not the custodian, if he's the point person, we're gonna appoint the point person.
So,
And then he would forward it back to me as I'm the custodian of my own records.
Yeah.
You're gonna know that. What you need to do is send me what you have in response. Because I don't have it.
No, but I should forward it to you,
And then he's gonna send it on.
and you're gonna send it on.
Right, your response.
Right.
Can you define, so custodian, I mean, if Marina's the custodian and I'm the custodian, then that means all these city employees are their
Yeah.
custodian, and that doesn't
I'm
seem
not
correct.
no, I'm not saying that.
Okay, so
I'm not saying that you individually are the custodians.
Right.
I'm saying you individually have an obligation to search your devices in response to FOIA requests.
So
Who
that-
you determine to be the custodian is the custodian.
But who determined, like, that's not been determined, so if I'm not the
Go
custodian,
for it.
where do I need to direct the requests?
Yes, you all will have to decide that.
So we should make a policy or something along those lines.
Yes, it's best practice to have some kind of a policy that says, this is the person who is our point person to receive FOIA requests and to respond to FOIA requests. What I was trying to articulate earlier is it's often the case that somebody has records, but the person who's been designated as the custodian doesn't have access to those records. And so the people who do have access to those records have an obligation to forward that to the custodian. Otherwise, the city will be on the hook for a FOIA violation.
So maybe the right way of saying it, if it's Steve, or if we have a FOIA specialist, they're the custodian of the FOIA, but the actual records The individual is the custodian until they give it to him.
Don't use the word custodian for him, just in.
Well, but that's
The
where
conduit, he's the conduit.
that's what I was trying to clear up, because custodian was being used in that manner, so that's
There's
what I
one
wanted to clear up.
custodian, right?
And that is the individual who holds the record, is what you're saying.
Sorry, what'd you
I said there's one custodian, there's not,
It's not the
Marina's
indiv-
not one, and me one, and Mike.
No, well, it depends if I'm understanding. If there's an email, say, between myself and Kevin Lilly, he's not here, and they want all those records, that's a custodian, and he has to send it in. I'm a custodian, and I have to send it in. And then it's brought together and sent out to
Yeah.
the person who requested it.
Yeah, so.
By Steve.
Yeah, so let's prescind from this is a dead end. This line of analysis is a dead end. In general, there's one custodian for an entity that can receive FOIA requests. The issue that we have here is that you're an organization like this, not like this. So Steve can't require you, he can't say, give me your device, I need to search it. You wouldn't want that. But the city will be on the hook for FOIA violation if you have records that are responsive and you don't forward them to Steve or whoever else gets designated as the point person for that. This is an aspect of the FOIA that has a little bit of a gray area in terms of, there was like a 2009 or 10 opinion that I wrote for a previous Attorney General addressing this exact question. And it came up in the context of, and then emails, personal emails. What if you have a governing body and you have people on the governing body who are using their personal emails to communicate information? How does the governing body go about responding to FOIA requests for that? Because the governing body member can just say, no, I'm not giving it to you, Steve. It's my stuff. I'm not going to give you my phone. You could do that. Then you put the city on the hook for a FOIA violation. So there is a little bit of gray. That's why I said this is a dead end here. And when you're dealing with an organization like this, normally you have one custodian. That's the person who has administrative control. If you all decide Steve is that guy, then Steve is the guy. And that would be you also deciding when we get a FOIA request, we're going to turn over our stuff to Steve. We have given him that authority
Let me
to ask
play,
for us
okay, let me
to pass that information.
devil's advocate with you, though. If Beverly's got a significant, doesn't matter how much, text messages on her personal phone, I'm not the custodian of that information. If I'm the point guy and we get an FOI request, I can send this out to everybody and say, please review the following FOI request and please send me, or if we have an FOI specialist, send that person your responses within the time frame.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, all that's true. That's what I'm saying. We're getting too hung up on the word custodian. There's no question. Anytime we have, earlier I said, like when you have questions about electronic records, start with paper. But really the principle is when you have a kind of a gray area, you start with what's clearer and better known. And you use that as a run-up to what's less known and less clear. So go ahead.
Just to make sure we are all clear, Steve cannot turn around and tell camera, go through their emails and search for X, Y, and Z.
I think he's
That's
already
why
made that.
That's why the mayor would be the custodian, because you can tell him, right? That's the person
No,
who has
I-
the authority.
I think didn't you already make it clear that the IT guy can't do that at all, right?
He's not the custodian, but
He
you
can
can
gather
ask
them.
him to search for keywords and get that data. He's not the custodian.
Can the mayor ask the IT person to search your official city email accounts?
Yes.
Yes.
Is that technologically possible?
Sure.
Okay, great. Next question. Can the mayor ask the IT guy to search your personal email accounts?
No.
No.
So if there is information on the personal email accounts, how is that information going to be transmitted?
We're responsible for that. We can take that and forward that to our email, or we can send that to the custodian, whoever it is. But as far as the city records, which I consider emails, if you work for Altel or you work for whoever it is, that's not your email. That's not your data, in my opinion. That belongs to the city. So you can instruct your employee, who is the IT director, to pull that data. and we have software to do that. And it's boom, done. And my point to that is, if I go through all of my emails and I have 20 emails that have to do with a certain topic, but I've left out 2, I've missed them,
Right.
I forgot them.
Right.
Or I didn't see them, whatever it is. Somebody else sends out 22. Well, then they're going, because we have some people out there that want to get you in a gotcha.
We'll compare
They
notes.
don't really care about the data. They want to catch you in a gotcha moment.
Okay?
And then my point is, if we are able to pull that data from the IT department, it's all there. They have all that.
Yeah,
Now, as far as my personal email and text, that's on me.
right.
I get that.
Yep. So, go ahead.
Ron, I'll just change a little devil's advocate. Except Marina was on a 4.5 week vacation. She didn't take.
Excuse me.
She didn't take her city iPad with her, okay? So she may have got some
We're
FOIA from that
exaggerating.
time and she could not respond. Same example, there was a FOIA in September
Yeah.
for the city council. I not take my city iPad, and I don't have it coming to my personal phone.
Right,
So, I mean, I don't even know about it.
right.
You're not gonna hit 3 days.
True.
Well,
I mean, that is true.
but
I
if
was
you-
gone for
but
an
if you
extended
get-
time, and I did not take my city iPad with me
But I
while
think in
gone,
that
so-
case, if you don't look at your email, you don't read your email, you don't know you have that.
Right.
Why, you're not expecting to return that information in 3 days.
The FOIA doesn't care if you're on vacation. That's why you have a
Okay,
point
so,
person.
does
That's
FOIA,
it's
but
not
does
us.
FOIA say, hey, man, you gotta check your email every day?
Because
No.
if I'm
Okay.
out of the I was out of the country actually, so
Yep.
I didn't have my iPad. There's no way I would know I had a
Right.
FOIA request, 'cause I
You
didn't
know-
have
Right.
access to email.
I
This
think
is
that's the
why-
reason why,
That's the reason we need a person to do that and get it so that.
I think
An
that,
example as far as, I know cities that I'm familiar with and have made myself familiar with because of this same issue. I don't know of one that's in, I'm sure there are, but in this manner as we are at this moment. There's somebody in most of these cities of our size that, how does it work, normally speaking?
There is a point person who is usually on some website, FOIA@cityofsherwood.org. And that's where you send your FOIA requests.
Okay.
And someone is always monitoring that account. So you can go on vacation.
Absolutely.
But the FOIA doesn't care. It is not a proper response to say, I'm the guy who monitors that and I'm on vacation. You got to have somebody monitoring that at all times. So the
But
best
it is
practice.
appropriate for the person who is the receptor, if you will, to say, the records you are requesting are in the possession of an individual who's out of the United States.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
So that's a response.
So-
You'll get it as soon as they get back.
Yeah, you all have to decide how you want to do this. There are a couple of ways to make this happen. The FOIA doesn't force you into one particular way, except for certain principles that I've tried to articulate already. It's not a sufficient response to say, I didn't see the email. I was out of the country. That's not a sufficient response. When I have helped 3 attorneys general respond to FOIA requests to their offices. When I'm gone, somebody else has to do that. It's not a sufficient response to say, Ryan's out of the office, we'll get back to you next week. So that's why there's usually some kind of a point person. How you do that is up to you.
But I can say, okay, IT department, even though you said earlier, IT no. Go through all their emails and try to find emails pertaining to subjects about cups.
Yeah. So the IT department is not the custodian. That means they cannot receive FOIA requests. Let me give an example about this. This happens at the state level. People send a FOIA request to a government entity and they don't get anything. They go, well, I'll go around them. I'll just go to the IT department. I'll send it to the Department of Information Systems. They have it, and they do have it, but they're not a custodian. So they not only are not required to disclose it, they can't. They don't have the decision-making authority to make that happen. So that's a principle. You all can decide. We want to have our IT guys search the file. You could decide that if you wanted to. You, as a group like this, instead of like this, you jointly have to make the decision. Who's going to be that person? Who's going to be the point person? What's going to be the protocol? And you have situations where if I were sort of shepherding that request in response, like the example that Steve gave, I would send that out to everybody. Everybody, please see the attached, FOI request. And that we're following the protocol that we have for city official emails. Please search your personal devices for anything responsive to these things. And then I get the auto responder saying, I'm in Italy, loving it. I'll get back to you in a week. Well, I make a note of that. And then when I go to respond to the requester, what I say is, please see the attached records responsive to request number 1. Request number 2, this office has no responsive records. Request number 3, we're not the custodian. Request number 4, please see the attached records responsive to your request. Finally, please be advised, at least one of our members is out on international trip and unable to check personal devices at this time. When that person returns, we'll ask them to make that check, and if we have any responsive records, we'll supplement at that time.
Perfect.
That's totally fine.
Perfect. Which is, I think, what we're asking to have happen in.
Well, I think just about everybody does it. Pulaski County Special School does it. North Little Rock, they all have somebody.
That it's filtering
That-
out, it filters
That's
into
right.
and out of, because
Well,
if you don't even know it, because it's coming to us individually, not coming to a source.
Yeah,
That's the boogabear.
you can't stop that, though.
But I'm not saying you
Yeah.
can stop it, I'm simply
But
saying.
if it came to us individually, it's appropriate to respond to that requester and say, I'm not the custodian, you need to send this request to,
The best response there would be, if you all decided that, I've been picking a lot on Steve.
We're gonna keep.
John Doe. If John Doe is going to be the point person. Then the response is, we've received your FOIA request. John Doe is a designated person to receive and respond to FOIA requests. I've CC'd that person here. We'll respond within the appropriate amount of time. That's it. Now you're done. You don't, that's the way to do it.
Okay.
Now get your records and get them to them.
Yeah.
if you have personal records that are not part of the city
Correct.
server.
Correct. So this is why, for example, you'll see a lot of public officials, they'll have 2 devices. They'll have their personal device and then their official device. It's not required under the FOIA to do it that way. It just makes it, yeah, there's my man.
The state didn't allow you to do personal stuff on the.
It's not required to do it that way under the FOIA. An employer might require, that's outside the FOIA. I'm talking about what the FOIA requires. It's not required that you have the 2 different kinds, but it sure does make responding a lot easier. Because I know, if ever I did some kind of official thing, it's not on that one. Does that make sense? So take that under advisement as well.
our IT director has a question.
Can I add something real quick?
Please.
If you have problems finding stuff, we are unequivocally here to support you and help you find stuff. Okay? I want you guys to know that. We stand behind you.
Thank you, Cameron.
Does, so if we say, okay, look at your personal devices, but all the city devices or city email. So there are situations where unless you read each individual email, or know the context of that individual email, you're not going to know if it pertains to what they're asking for or not.
Right.
So what advice can you give to, so is that's what we're trying to figure out in terms of,
So, yeah, this is a fair point. And to your question earlier about what do others do, what I had gotten as I was articulating what kind of the best practice is, I only got to the first step. And the first step is that you have a point person. You decide who that is. You decide what that point person's responsibilities are. Create an email address. Somebody's always watching that, so the point person can go on vacation sometimes, right? So you have a clear protocol, a clear intake chain. You all are trained and regularly reminded, hey, when we get FOIA requests, this is what you do. You respond to the person, you CC that point person, whatever, okay? You all decide that. That's the first step in the chain. The next step in the chain is where I'm saying you all have discretion. You can decide. You got to pick a path, but you have to decide. And so one path is to say, you all will empower the IT guy to search all your official devices. And then the IT guy will have to search through those devices, and he or whoever is the point person will have to look and say, gosh, it seems like it's responsive. I don't know. And then maybe they come to you and ask you about it or whatever. That's one path. That's a legal possible path. Another legal possible path sorry, let me back up. In that path that I just described, I just said official. Bear in mind, I'm always assuming unofficial, like your personal stuff, you're gonna have to be the ones to check that, right? Okay, so let's just leave that as a footnote, that's just a standing thing, okay? So that's one possible path. The other possible path is when the request comes in, it goes to the point person, who then sends it to everybody, and then you search your own stuff because you know what the email was about. You could do it that way. That would be a permissible, legal way to do it. You could do a third approach, that's some kind of a hybrid. You could do it that way. In general, we're going to have a situation where the IT guy is going to, and you can tell sometimes in FOIA requests which is the appropriate way to go. Sometimes the way people make FOIA requests, the best way to do it is to have the IT guy do the search. Because the way the request is worded, sometimes doing the search is not going to get you what you need to know. And so sometimes you can go the third way, which is some kind of a hybrid. The benefit of the hybrid is you have flexibility. The downside of the hybrid is you have flexibility, right? And you're going to have to make, it's going to be more conversations about all this stuff is going to be more prominent, more, are we going with option one here, we're going option two? But you all have to make that choice. There are parameters that the FOIA sets for how you make the choice and what makes those different pathways legal and permissible, but it's up to y'all to how to make that choice. Well, the reason the IT guys can't be the ones to receive it is they're not the custodians. That's a decision. They can't make the choices like that about which ones to disclose and which ones not to disclose, that the FOIA exempts them from being custodians. But they can help in responding if that's what you all want to do. If you don't want to do it, there are other ways to make it happen.
Great.
That was good information.
Yep. What happens is we get those and if you get, they come in ebbs and flows, but when you get a lot, most of us, except for these ladies that are retired, we all have full-time jobs, and maybe, and can't respond in a timely manner. So to go through and comb and the intent of the law is to leave your email so that you can, so it is open to the public, but not to send it, delete it, send it, delete it, send it, delete it, because, that's really not the spirit of the law. But at the same time, like right now, I got 1,380 emails. I can't do
Bless
that
you.
all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I can't.
crazy.
That's too time consuming, and then to send, that's why I made a lot of calls today, and I didn't call one city that doesn't use their IT to pull it for them, and then send it to whoever the point person is.
Yeah. Okay. The hour's getting late. The remainder here that I have goes to just basically the timeframes for response. We'll skip the notice stuff. We'll skip that. We've already talked about that. Step 3, this is evaluating the FOIA request. This is basically the first part of all that we did. Is it a public record? Are there any exemptions and so on? The main thing you want to know from this, I say wield the Sharpie. Everybody's saying, the reason I say that is you have to be able to see what has been redacted and where. No whiteout. It's a big deal. We've all seen the guy, the news broadcaster, today the CIA released 1,000 previously classified documents. And to show you that they're serious, they always put a little tear sheet up, and it's like, the, black line, black line, black line, SUV. And you're like, I don't know what declassified means to that guy.
I know, we always, when we did the Sharpie, because we had to redact her copy,
Yes.
we weren't allowed to send that. We actually had to make a copy.
Yeah, because sometimes you can see through it.
See through it.
Yeah. So wield the Sharpie. Next step. This is where the notice requirements come in. Our office has a special role at this stage, which we can talk about after if you're interested. But that's kind of in the weeds. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, this is relevant to you. The most recent legislative session passed this act, Act 879, which previously there was no requirement in the law that when a custodian, when you received a FOIA request, that you acknowledge it. Or that you, if you were going to deny it, that you deny it. And so after 3 days, it was basically deemed denied. And so my understanding is that there were a bunch of custodians, there were custodians who a bunch of times never responded. And so they amended the FOIA to say, if you get a FOIA request and you don't have any records, you have to say so. We have no records responsive to your request. If you think it's a records exempt for some reason, you got to cite the exemption. Personnel records. Clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. Employee evaluation record, right? We are going to withhold it unless the person was suspended or fired. This person was commended, so that doesn't get disclosed. And you can charge, but this is becoming less and less of a thing because the actual cost of reproducing a PDF is, right? So you can't charge that. All right. There you go. Any questions?
Does the AG's office as an law enforcement business offer, what you call it, continuing education classes on the FOI?
We do.
Okay. So generally speaking. then
This is
most-
one of them.
Most cities or most businesses generally have, I'm not saying it's Steve, but an attorney or a city attorney or that point person that stays abreast of this stuff
Yes.
all the time.
Yes. That's me. Yeah. That's me at the AG's office, keeping up with this. So.
No, but I mean, say, city X, whoever their person.
Oh, I
is.
see, yeah, I see. So for example, even like next month, and I think in about 2-3 weeks, we're gonna have a webinar. It's for free, you can, tune in, whatever. And we do those kinds of things periodically as well. Okay, so, last thing, remember, your three questions, the sequence. Please make me proud. The first question is the entity subject to the act? Is it covered? Yeah. Step 2, is the record or meeting covered? Is it covered by the FOIA? And kept as part of that analysis. And then if we answered yes to both, now we're going on to step 3, which is? Are there any exemptions?
I do
Don't
have
front load that one.
one more question. Would it be a best practice, like if IT finds, okay, these are the emails I think there are, send them back to the person so they could go,
You
yeah,
could do that's a hybrid. That's that third
that looks
example I was
right,
giving.
and then send it on or whatever, because my concern is I don't want, like, if he misses something,
Well, the point person's not gonna necessarily know
No.
it's not relevant. We will have to add some type of way of saying, this is what's been located. Do you believe this to be responsive to the request? And let the council say yes,
Right.
no.
Could I ask
Right,
you a
the
question?
individual,
Let me ask a
yeah.
question. Shelby, I hope you don't mind me asking this question. Shelby sits on the Pulaski County School Board. When a FOIA request comes in, do you ever see that?
I get notice that there was a request.
Right.
They go through the emails and then they do the redacting and they send it out.
So it doesn't come to you?
No, it doesn't
It
come
goes.
Because
But you're informed.
I'm informed. Because at the end of the day, if they're looking for, I'm just, the elephant's in the room. They're looking for something about the lease. If you search everybody's email for the word lease,
Joey's.
everything's
Lease.
gonna come up about the lease, and you just.
Exactly.
If you search for lease, it's not gonna miss an email that has that word lease in it.
Yeah,
If it doesn't have the word lease in it, it's not pertaining to what we're talking about.
right.
And then that's when someone has to go through, because it could be the lease of this or the lease of that, and
Yeah.
you only need to.
So that's to Steve's point about the relevance of it. So
relevance.
it sounds like, as I'm hearing everybody talk, it's this third way, this third option that I was given, that here's a way you could do it that's permissible, here's a way you could do it that's permissible, here's a way you could do it that's permissible. Whatever that third option, where it's kind of a hybrid, where you have the IT guy doing some searches, but you're gonna have to weigh in at times.
and I
Now,
would
don't-
say that county's not necessarily the best way, because he could have emails on his personal account that he's a custodian of a record or a
Yeah.
text message, and if he didn't, if he doesn't ever do anything with it, and they just go through the IT and they just handle it.
Yeah.
That's why he's notified.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, that background assumption, so I didn't have to keep, that you're always gonna be the one to have to search your own personal devices. There's no way around that. And the motivation for you to do so is not just because it's the right thing to do, but also because if you don't, and there's something responsive, the city can be on the hook for a FOIA violation, and it's basically on you for that, So there's a couple different options, there's a couple different ways y'all can make that happen, but y'all need to make a decision as a group about how that's gonna happen, and then I would write it up, put it in writing. People forget, new people come on, they need to be trained, put it in writing, and don't treat it like a stone tablet. Put it in writing, and maybe 6-8 months down the road, say, hey, we need to revisit this piece. No problem, make a
Okay.
change.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I have a question on the order on that. Yes, when we do a very broad search for the word lease, would IT then be held responsible for filtering out what is being requested? Like, they said, do a search for lease, but we never knew it was Joey's lease.
Yeah, you're not gonna be That decision should be made on the front end. So, about it being sufficiently specific to enable us to locate the records with reasonable effort. If the request comes in, I want all emails about the lease, and I'm the guy handling that, I say, do you mean Joey's lease?
That's gonna be the
And he
custodian.
says, yes.
It is proper to ask for specificity on.
Well, the custodian should give you that information. The custodian knows what the request is. The custodian should say, hey, I need all this information.
Right, because
Here are the parameters.
the city
You shouldn't have to
leases,
do anything
there's a lot of
but
things the
pull that
city
data.
leases. I mean, we lease golf course equipment, we lease this, we lease that. So if you just hit the word lease, there could be a lot of different emails about leases.
Well, and there could be an email that doesn't have the word lease
Right.
specifically in it, but it is about.
It could say
the
something
lease.
else about Joey and not say lease.
That comes back to exactly what I said at the city council meeting. It's a very broad tool, and I
And-
just want to make sure that.
But the other thing, you can't, and excuse me, Cameron, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Ryan, I can't say, I want everything with the word lease in it from 2001. You have to have a window of
It
time.
needs to be sufficiently specific to enable you to locate the records with reasonable effort, for sure.
Reasonable, right.
Yeah. The other thing is, the FOIA is not like discovery, like in a lawsuit. In a lawsuit, if I send you a thing that says, request for production of documents, please send me all records, blah, 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 that meet these criteria, and that you left one out, the judge is gonna ask you some questions about that. That's not how the FOIA works. You have to do a reasonable search.
Okay.
You have to do a reasonable search. And so if you've done a reasonable search, that, and there's some records that maybe we just didn't find in that reasonable search. The question is, was the search reasonable? That make sense?
Some of it can come
Yeah.
down to limitations.
Yeah.
Joey, comma, S.
Sure, yeah,
Commas aren't searched.
yeah.
Go
Yeah.
back
But it was a
to-
reasonable
Go back to your shredding though.
Okay.
Let's go back, because I'm like April, I have so many emails that, I mean, I literally weekly try to delete things, just because there's so much. So you were talking about, it's lost my train of thought.
About shredding?
About the shredding,
Yeah.
it's in the trash can, I shredded that, so.
I've got grandkids.
Yeah, I don't, that really doesn't factor in on this, because if it has been shredded, like we talked about being double deleted, and you're outside this 14-day window, then it's just not public record. And even if you were to search it, even if you were to search it, it wouldn't come up, because it's gone.
If you have no record, you can't produce it. If you don't have the record, you can't produce it.
Can't produce something out thin air.
It's gonna be the one that's more, hearing you correctly, more familiar with, okay, this is too broad, before you even get to IT.
Yes.
Go back to that person and
Yes,
say, we need
this
to
is an,
control
absolutely, this is another reason why the point person is so important, because they act as the initial filter on what is being requested. Let me give an example. Sometimes I've received FOIA requests. Somebody calls and they say, I want to make a FOIA request, and I say, and then somehow it gets sent to me. And I say, this is Ryan, and they say, I want to make a FOIA request, and I say, okay, great. What's your FOIA request? And they tell me what it is. And I say, would you like to put that in writing and send it to me in email? No, I don't. Okay, great. Can you give me a contact information for you so that we can get you the documents if we have any that are responsive? Yes, I can. What's a good email address for you? Da, 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 da. I'm the point guy, okay? Then I open up my email. Dear so-and-so, thank you for your call today, in which you requested XYZ documents. If I'm mistaken about our conversation, please let me know immediately, send. They didn't want to put it in writing, they're not required to, that's fine. I'm gonna put it in writing, and now we're gonna get clarity. So that now, when my client goes about getting those records, this is what we talked about, and if there's some confusion later, no, that's not what we said. I'm like, hey man, I sent you a confirmatory email, and that was the time to object. That makes sense? So you need a point person on the front end who's looking at this stuff. As a practical matter, here's what this means, y'all. It means that FOIA takes a heck of a lot of time.
Yes.
It takes a heck of a lot of resources. It takes a heck of a lot of money.
But that's why the onus has to be on the city, because they have resources and manpower and software that I as an individual don't have. You see what I'm saying? I mean, that's why we need.
Except for going through each and every
Well,
single email.
But once again, as long as it's not on, as long as it's only on the city. So that means no one can use their personal accounts, no one can use a business account, no one can use a personal phone.
Yeah, we understand that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.